It started with a bark, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. In the middle of a busy airport terminal, a canine named Bruno broke protocol and uncovered something no one else saw. What followed wasn't just an investigation, it was a race against silence, and a story about trust, instinct, and the bond between a man and his dog. If stories like this speak to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real moments where quiet courage changes everything. It was a Monday morning that smelled like routine. Terminal C of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Rollers clacked over polished tiles. Loudspeakers echoed boarding calls. Families grouped around outlets, clinging to their phones and coffees. Mark Delaney had worked this beat for nearly a decade, and despite the swirling movement of thousands, he saw patterns, not noise. Nothing ever really surprised him. Nothing except when Bruno disobeyed. The Belgian Malinois had been with Mark for 3 years. Smart, reliable, a little too sensitive according to some trainers. But he'd never broken protocol. Not until now. They were just rounding the west wing near gate C-17 when Bruno's ears perked. He paused mid-stride, his head low, nose twitching. Mark followed his line of... It was a woman, probably in her early 30s, standing near the security rope with 2 kids. The little girl, maybe 6, clutched a travel pillow to her chest. Her younger brother, around 5, had a blue backpack and a baseball cap pulled low. They looked like any other family flying back home after spring break. Normal. Too normal. But Bruno growled, a low, uneasy sound that vibrated through the leash. Then, without warning, he pulled. Mark had barely registered the tension before the leash went taut. Bruno lunging forward with unmistakable urgency. "Bruno, heel!" Mark snapped, voice firm. The dog didn't stop. Passengers turned, a few gasped. A TSA officer took notice. Mark's boots clicked hard as he followed, working to control Bruno before someone panicked and called security on them. He yanked the leash sharply and Bruno finally paused, chest heaving, staring fixedly at the boy's backpack. His growl dropped into a tense, warning bark. Mark approached the woman slowly, carefully masking his own tension. "Ma'am," he said, flashing his badge. "Sorry to interrupt, I'm Officer Delaney with Canine Patrol. May I ask your name?" She blinked, smiled, a little too rehearsed. "Charlotte Miles," she replied, shifting the bag on her shoulder. "Is something wrong?" Mark glanced down. Bruno's focus hadn't shifted. Not once. He was locked in. "And the kids?" Mark asked casually. The little girl looked away. The boys said nothing. "Ellie and Ben," Charlotte said with a smile. "We're flying home to Boston." "Everything all right with the dog?" a nearby TSA agent asked, watching warily. "He's reacting to something," Mark muttered. "Probably just a scent anomaly, could be food, even medication." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Bruno wasn't easily fooled. Mark crouched down and gave Bruno a gentle nudge. "What is it, buddy?" Bruno responded by inching closer to the boy, nose near the backpack, tail stiff. He whined softly, a low, almost pleading sound. That was new. The boy clutched the straps tighter. "Ma'am, would you mind if I have a quick look inside this backpack?" Charlotte's smile faltered for half a second. "Just half. It's just snacks and toys, we're already late." "I understand, it won't take a moment." Charlotte hesitated, and the boy, Ben, finally looked up. His eyes were glassy, distant. Mark had seen that look before. In shelters, in emergency rooms, in war zones. "Sir," Charlotte said, voice sharper now, "is this necessary?" Mark nodded once. "Yes." There was a pause, a moment where it felt like the air stilled. Bruno's body coiled slightly, ready for something, but Charlotte exhaled and opened the zipper. Inside, coloring books, a toy car, a bag of goldfish crackers. Nothing else. Mark narrowed his eyes. "Mind if I check underneath?" She tilted the bag toward him, stiffly. Mark reached in, fingers feeling along the seams. Nothing, no false bottom, no scent markers, no wires. He stood slowly. Something was wrong, and yet nothing was technically out of place. Bruno whined again, backing up a step, then forward. His nose twitched toward the kid's sleeve this time. "Ben," Mark said softly, kneeling. "You doing okay, buddy?" The boy didn't answer. Charlotte immediately stepped between them, smiling once again, this time tighter. "Sorry, he's shy around uniforms." Mark straightened, unsettled. His radio crackled faintly on his shoulder, but he ignored it. Bruno had never reacted like this. Not once in years of bomb sweeps, narcotic scans, crowd control. He was trained to differentiate intensity from false positives to active threat. So why now? Mark took a breath. I think we'll need to do a secondary check. Charlotte's smile vanished completely. We haven't done anything wrong, she said, voice steely. No one said you did. He signaled another officer subtly. Bruno's tail flicked once, eyes locked on the child's backpack again. Mark didn't have evidence yet, but he had instinct, and Bruno had something strong. Mark stood still for a beat, watching Charlotte's carefully measured smile as she zipped the backpack closed again. His gut screamed that something was off, but protocol wasn't built on instincts alone, it required proof. A moment later, TSA Officer Reynolds stepped over, responding to Mark's earlier signal. Mark gave him a slight nod, and together they guided Charlotte and the kids toward the screening booth beside Gate C-17, politely but firmly asking for cooperation. Charlotte didn't protest, at least not out loud, though the stiffness in her jaw said enough. Mark kept Bruno close as the group entered the smaller, glass-walled security room, one used for routine spot checks or additional clearances. The kids trailed behind Charlotte like shadows, Ellie's hands still wrapped around her travel pillow, and Ben dragging slightly behind, his small hand clutching the edge of her coat. You won't take long, Mark said calmly, setting a soothing tone. We'll just run a secondary ID verification and another scan on your items, standard with any canine alert. Of course, Charlotte replied, voice crisp, not flinching. Do what you need to. Mark watched her as Reynolds began scanning their documents. The ID scanner beeped green 3 times in a row. Charlotte Miles, U.S. passport valid. Ellie Miles, age 6. Benjamin Miles, age 5. Birthplaces listed as Worcester, Massachusetts. All files checked out, no alerts or flags on any of them. Their boarding passes matched Flight 418 to Boston Logan, 11:55 a.m., Gate C-21. Paperwork looks clean, Reynolds muttered under his breath, passing the documents to Mark. So do the scan logs. No duplicates, no forgeries, names are in the system. Thanks, Mark murmured, flipping through each passport again. The photographs looked natural enough, Charlotte's especially, but something about the kids' pictures felt too perfect. Not a flaw, not a stray hair, both kids looking straight at the camera with forced expressions, like they'd been told exactly how to sit and stare. Mark set the passports down and crouched slightly to face the kids. Hi Ellie, hi Ben, I'm Mark. You guys headed home? He asked softly, offering a reassuring half-smile. Ellie's eyes flicked upward for only a split second before snapping back down to her sneakers. Her fingers tightened around the pillow. You excited to see your rooms again? He continued gently, watching for reaction. Nothing. Not even a nod. Ben's response was even more telling, his lips pressed into a line, his fingers digging into the shoulder strap of his backpack with white-knuckle grip. Mark's eyes narrowed. Did you guys have fun on your trip? He asked, still crouched, still casual. Silence. The room held its breath for a second. Charlotte spoke up a little too quickly. They're just shy, she said. Long flight ahead, they're tired. We were up since... She reached down, brushing a hair from Ellie's forehead. They'll perk up once we're in the air. Mark stood slowly, never taking his eyes off the kids. Of course, airports can be overwhelming. Reynolds had finished rescanning their bags and now began inspecting their luggage piece by piece. No narcotics, no electronics flagged, no metal objects unaccounted for. Bruno sat silently beside Mark but continued to eye the backpack Ben carried, ears twitching now and then. Has your dog ever been wrong? Charlotte asked suddenly. Mark looked at her. No, he said plainly. She arched a brow. Never? That's impressive, sounds almost impossible. It's not about being perfect, Mark replied. It's about recognizing patterns. She tilted her head slightly. And what pattern does he see here? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He leaned down toward Bruno, running a hand along the dog's back. Bruno was alert but not aggressive. His posture was the kind he displayed during scent identification, not confrontation. The dog wasn't scared, he was sure, and that made Mark trust him more than any database. Reynolds gave a final nod. Clean, he said. Everything's clear. Mark stepped back, taking another slow glance at the trio. A textbook clean profile, clean documents, no suspicious belongings. By all measurable standards, they were just a family headed home. But the lack of reaction from the children wasn't just shyness. Mark had seen shy kids, nervous kids, even anxious travelers. This was different. This was muted, suppressed, conditioned. "Are you their legal guardian?" he asked, still watching Charlotte's face. "Yes," she said without pause. "I'm their mother." "Biological?" Her lips thinned. "Yes." Her voice was firmer now, bordering defensive. "Do you have any further reason to question that?" Mark held her gaze, covering protocol. "We've had an increase in identity fraud cases involving minors. Nothing personal." "Well, nothing fraudulent here," she replied, then added, "Officer." She didn't say it with sarcasm, but she didn't have to. Mark looked once more at Ben. The boy shifted behind his sister now, backpack pressed against his chest like a shield. Ellie hadn't moved an inch. Not once during the entire conversation had she asked for a snack, said she needed the bathroom, or even looked around the room like most kids would. No fidgeting, no whining, no questions. Just silence. Mark handed Charlotte her documents. "You're all set." She took them with a crisp nod, reached for the kids and guided them toward the door. "Thank you for your time," she said, voice cool. "Come on, sweethearts." Mark didn't reply. He just watched them leave, Bruno still seated beside him, tail motionless. As the glass door closed behind them and Reynolds gathered up his paperwork, Mark exhaled slowly. "You think?" Reynolds asked. "She's either the most composed mom I've ever seen," Mark said, "or she's not their mom at all." Reynolds raised a brow. "That's a hell of a leap, maybe," Mark replied, watching the family walk down toward gate C21. Bruno stood slowly, ears still forward, eyes locked on their retreating figures. "But I've learned to pay attention when someone doesn't react the way they should, especially kids." "He froze up," Reynolds said, frowning. "Could just be fatigue." Mark shook his head. "No, that wasn't exhaustion, that was silence, the wrong kind." Reynolds sighed. "Well, unless you're seeing something concrete, this isn't enough to stop them." Mark nodded. He knew. He had no grounds to detain them further. Every dot was connected. Document was clean, but deep inside, something still burned cold. Bruno moved closer to the glass wall, nose almost pressed against it as he watched the trio merge into the crowd. Mark stared after them, and a thought slid quietly into his mind, uninvited but heavy. "If we let them board, are they coming back?" Mark leaned against the metal frame of the security booth, arms crossed, eyes locked on gate C21. He couldn't shake it. Ellie's silence, Ben's grip on that backpack, Bruno's fixed focus. On paper, the case was closed, and yet every instinct in his body screamed that something wasn't right. Beside him, Bruno sat upright, ears pricked, tail stiff. He hadn't stopped watching the family. They were now 20 yards ahead, moving toward board. The crowd had thickened. Late morning departures swelled the terminal like clockwork. Rolling luggage, hushed voices. Barista calls, routine, normal. Mark hated how danger could hide inside normal. He watched as Charlotte approached the gate agent. She handed over the boarding passes. The kids stood at her side like props, unmoving. Bruno suddenly rose. His body tensed. A soft, guttural growl rumbled in his throat. Mark tightened his grip on the leash, sensing the shift. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. But Bruno was no longer still. He lunged forward, barking loud and sharp. Not a casual bark, it was the command. The boarding agent jerked back slightly. "What the hell?" someone muttered behind Mark. Bruno strained so hard the leash snapped taut. Mark dug his boots into the tile and pulled back hard. "Bruno, sit!" The dog didn't sit. He barked again, 3 short bursts, then let out a low, vibrating growl aimed directly at the backpack still clutched. Mark felt the leash trembling in his hand. Bruno wasn't guessing, he was certain. That type of bark was taught in week 9 of scent and threat detection. It meant immediate threat. Mark moved fast. "Hold boarding," he called out to the gate agent, showing his badge. "Step aside, ma'am," he said to Charlotte. "We need one more look." Charlotte froze. Not in confusion, in calculation. Her fingers flexed slightly at her sides before she forced a smile. "We've already been checked." "Ma'am?" "The dog's alerting again." "I don't make the rules." He gestured toward a secondary TSA agent moving into position. "Please step away from the children." Around them, the crowd paused. Boarding announcements were cut off mid-sentence, phones tilted up to record. Charlotte knelt, murmuring something to Ellie and Ben. too soft for Mark to hear, but Ellie stiffened. Her hand reached for Ben's. Ben didn't move. Bruno's barking cut through the air again, but before Mark could approach closer, a new voice spoke behind him. "Officer?" Mark turned. A man was jogging toward them from the concourse, wearing jeans, a dark navy jacket, and a baseball cap. Early 40s, light stubble, calm, measured stride. "Sorry I'm late," the man said, slightly out of breath. "I'm Joel Barnes. Their father." Mark blinked. "Excuse me? Those are my kids," Joel said, pointing at Ben and Ellie, then flashing what looked like a driver's license. "We got separated earlier. I ran back for something, thought I'd meet them here. I didn't see you with them at all today," Mark said. "You flew in together?" "No, we came separately," Joel replied slowly. "My ex-wife and I split last year, joint custody. I booked her flight earlier. Met up here in Seattle. Plan was to fly back to Boston as a family." Mark raised a brow. "So you're Charlotte's ex-husband?" "Technically, yes, but we're on good terms." Joel smiled tightly. "This wasn't supposed to be a big deal." Bruno growled again, but now it was different. His eyes darted between Joel and Ben. Not one point of focus. Two. Mark's mind raced. "Do you have ID?" he asked. Joel handed over the license and a boarding pass. It matched Joel Barnes, flight 418, same seat row as Charlotte. But the ID looked pristine. Too pristine. "Do you have documentation proving guardianship or custody?" Joel hesitated for just a second too long. "I don't carry that around, officer." "But their mom is right there, ask her." Mark looked over to Charlotte. She'd turned to face them now, her smile thin, knuckles white as she gripped her tote bag. Ellie and Ben stood behind her like dolls. "Charlotte," Mark called out, "can you confirm this man's identity?" She nodded once. "He's their father." But she didn't say his name. Not Joel, not even yes, just he's their father. Mark's grip on the leash tightened. Bruno let out a low, vibrating whine, eyes locked now on Joel's left pocket. Mark scanned the man quickly, nothing obvious, but he wore a zip-up jacket with a heavy bulge on the left side. "Sir," Mark said, stepping forward, "you'll need to come with." Joel took a small step back. "Seriously?" "Yes. This is harassment," he said. "I've done nothing wrong. My kids are right there." He gestured toward Ben and Ellie. They didn't react. Mark noticed that neither child had moved since Joel showed up. No smile, no shift in posture, not even a look in his direction. Joel tried again. "Hey Ben, buddy, tell him who I am." Ben did. Mark turned back to the TSA agent. "Please escort the family to holding room B. Separate the children. I want them spoken to individually. Quiet room, no parents present." "On what grounds?" Charlotte snapped. "Your dog barked?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't have to. Bruno barked again, once, short and sharp. It echoed across the gate like a pistol crack. The crowd behind them murmured louder. A woman clutched her purse tighter. Joel shifted his stance. Mark took a step closer, voice low. "Jacket off. Hands where I can see them." "Come on, man," Joel muttered. But he unzipped slowly, lifting the jacket from his shoulder. Mark stepped forward to take it when he caught the edge of something. A folded map tucked into the side pocket, partially sticking out, hand-drawn lines in red pen. His gut flipped. "You carry flight routes with you?" "It's nothing," Joel said quickly. "Just notes. I fly a lot." Mark turned to the second agent. "We're moving them now." Bruno barked again, twice this time, and Ben flinched for the first time that morning, just slightly, like the sound broke something inside him that had been locked in place. Ellie's eyes flicked upward, just for a second, toward Mark. Mark motioned for the group to move, flanking Joel to one side and Charlotte to the other, directing them down a quieter corridor that fed into holding room B, a dull, windowless space used for secondary checks and interviews. 2 additional agents followed behind, one keeping an eye on the surrounding crowd, the other leading the way forward. Bruno walked stiffly beside Mark, ears forward, every step deliberate. His gaze fixed not on Joel this time, but on Charlotte's tote bag. Charlotte had repositioned it on her opposite shoulder, maybe thinking it looked more casual that way. But Bruno noticed, and Mark noticed Bruno noticing. The dog slowed as they turned the final corner into the room. Mark stopped just outside the doorway, holding the leash tighter as Bruno sniffed toward Charlotte's side. Mark's voice was even. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to set your bag on the table inside. Charlotte didn't move at first. We've already been through this, twice. Standard procedure, Mark replied. Given the additional alert and your companion's late arrival, we're rechecking everything. She hesitated, then nodded curtly and stepped into the room, placing the tote onto the metal table with a little more force than necessary. Bruno tensed. He took a single step forward, nose raised, body frozen. Then he let out a low, short whine and abruptly took one step back. Mark's pulse ticked higher. That was not a scent detection alert, that was a chemical reaction. Bruno's training had drilled it in. When a dog recoils instead of engages, it means contamination or narcotics, specifically substances with high sedative concentrations or volatile compounds. Bruno, Mark said quietly. The dog didn't break eye contact with the bag. Mark stepped in front of the table and opened the tote slowly. Inside were what one might expect: a folded sweatshirt, tissues, children's snacks, a paperback novel. But as Mark sifted through, his fingers brushed something hard wrapped in fabric. He unrolled it to reveal a small, unmarked white bottle with a sealed dropper cap. No prescription label, no brand name. His brow furrowed. "What's this?" Charlotte's tone remained calm but tight. "Essential oils. I use them to relax the kids on flights. Do you usually carry them in an unmarked medical container?" "I transferred it from another bottle," she said. The original cap was broken. Mark didn't respond. He turned the bottle over, examining it in the light. The seal was intact. Bruno let out a sterile swab kit from the side drawer and began preparing a quick reactive chemical test strip. Charlotte crossed her arms, clearly irritated now. Joel sat at the far end of the room, saying nothing, his eyes darting between Mark's hands and the children, as if silently calculating how much time this detour would cost him. The test strips turned pale blue within seconds of contact. Mark stared at it. "This is benzodiazepine-based," he said flatly. "That's not essential oil, it's a sedative." "It's just a mild one, nothing dangerous." "Why are you carrying a sedative strong enough to trigger my dog's chemical response cue?" Mark asked, stepping slightly closer. "But why wasn't this disclosed during the baggage scan?" She said nothing. Her arms tightened. Mark turned to the agent by the door. "Separate the children now. Interview room opposite side." The agent nodded and moved toward Ellie and Ben. Ellie took a step back, clutching her travel pillow. Ben still hadn't said a word since the gate. Mark bent slightly to reassure them. "It's okay, you're not in trouble, I just want to ask you a few questions in private." As he crouched down to Ellie's level, Bruno came beside him, calm now but still alert. Ellie stared down at her shoes, her grip tight on the pillow's edge. Mark waited, giving her space. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't nod, didn't speak. He waited a few more seconds, then started to rise. That's when she whispered, barely audible, not even lifting her face. "Don't let us go with them." Mark froze, his breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer. "What did you say?" Ellie's mouth trembled slightly, but she said nothing more. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tile floor, but her fingers now clutched the pillow so tightly the seams looked ready to tear. Mark's heart thudded in his chest. He looked at the other agent. "Now," he said, "take them." Ellie and Ben were gently separated, led into adjoining rooms. Charlotte started to protest, stepping forward, but Bruno growled low in his throat. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Joel rose to his feet. "This is absurd. You can't interrogate minors without parental consent." Mark turned to face him. "You're not on file as a legal guardian. Not yet. Until that's verified, you don't call the shots." Joel scoffed, pulling out his phone. "You'll hear from my attorney in 10 minutes. Mark nodded toward another agent. "Make sure that device is documented. No calls out." Joel held the phone up, not dialing, just glared. Mark turned back to the tote, pulled out the remaining items and set them on the table. A second bottle, nearly identical to the first, had slipped into the lining pocket. Bruno sniffed it once, then stepped back again. 2 containers, enough sedative to knock out both children for hours. Mark stared at them, feeling the weight of Ellie's whisper settle over everything like a dark veil. "Don't let us go with them." The words weren't frightened, they were resigned, practiced. She'd said it like she'd rehearsed it before, like it was the last card she had to play. Mark glanced at the door to the interview room where Ellie had just entered, his hand curled into a fist at his side. The wall clock ticked. Bruno sat beside him, quiet now but watching Joel like a shadow waiting to move. And Mark, he suddenly realized he wasn't just investigating anymore. He was already in the middle of something much bigger. Something far worse than a suspicious bag or a broken custody agreement. Something that was about to unravel. Mark stood with the 2 unmarked bottles clenched tightly in one hand, the blue Rachid test strip still pinned under his thumb like a quiet indictment. The weight of Ellie's whisper pressing hard against his chest. Around him, the room felt more compressed, heavier somehow. Joel sat with feigned calm, fingers steepled and elbows on his knees, eyes drifting toward the hallway like he was gauging distance, escape angles. Charlotte had gone silent after her initial protest, but her arms were crossed tightly now, and her jaw was rigid enough to grind steel. Mark didn't have a search warrant, and he didn't yet have a court order. What he did have was a canine alert, an unmarked sedative, and a little girl who finally broke her silence to say 7 words that turned this from protocol to emergency. He pressed the intercom button on the wall. "Control? This is Officer Delaney at Holding Room B. I need local PD at my location. Expedite." "Copy that. ETA 3 minutes." Mark turned to Joel first. "You're not under arrest, but you are being detained pending verification of guardianship and the origin of this medication." Joel snorted. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that a federal canine has positively alerted to a chemical substance in your party's possession, and a child under your claimed care has made a distress statement," Mark answered evenly. "That's not enough," Joel said, half rising. "You need a warrant for this kind of overreach." Mark stepped in front of him, calm but unyielding, in a federal transit facility with a minor involved and suspected sedatives. "I don't need a warrant to protect a child in immediate risk." Charlotte's voice snapped across the room. "You're making a mistake." "If I am," Mark said, locking eyes with her, "it's one I'll happily live with." He turned toward the TSA supervisor standing in the hallway. "I need Flight 417 delayed. Hold boarding and ground the manifest until I clear it." "Delaying a full flight?" the supervisor asked, unsure. "You want the paperwork on that?" "I'll take full accountability," Mark said. "Make the call." The supervisor hesitated only a second, then disappeared into the adjacent operations room. Mark stepped back, eyeing Bruno, who had returned to full attention, sitting near the table but facing the exit. The dog's tail wasn't wagging. It was motionless, and his ears were locked forward like a compass needle toward a coming storm. Joel stood, fully now. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," Mark replied, "after we verify the children are safe." "This is harassment," Joel barked, taking a half step toward the door. "Sit down," Mark said. Joel didn't. In fact, his knees bent ever so slightly, like a runner warming up. Bruno let out a low warning growl. "Sir, last time," Mark said, hand hovering near his radio. "Take a seat." That's when the hallway camera clicked on. Joel glanced at it, his jaw flexed. Then, without warning, he lunged sideways, not toward the room's entrance but toward the side corridor that led back to Terminal B. His movement was sudden but clean, practiced. Mark reacted a second too late. "Bruno, go." Bruno bolted. It wasn't a bark and hold command, it was pursuit. His paws scratched sharply against the linoleum as he took off, lean body slipping like a bullet through the half-open door. Mark shouted after Joel, "Stop!" but the man had already disappeared past the corner. Bruno's growls echoed, distant but rising. Mark sprinted after them, dodging around a stunned airport vendor pushing a beverage cart. Passengers turned in confusion. An announcement blared something about gate changes overhead. None of it mattered. He tore through the corridor, rounding the bend just in time to see Joel barreling down the wide hallway leading to Terminal B's exit. He was fast, too fast for most men in boots and gear, but Bruno was faster. The dog was already closing the gap, eyes locked, head low. At 20 feet, Joel glanced back and saw the dog mid-sprint. He pivoted too hard, misstepped, and stumbled just enough for Bruno to launch. The German Malinois hit with calculated force, not to maul but to drop. His teeth latched onto the fabric of Joel's pant leg just above the calf. Joel went down hard, the momentum dragging him across the floor and into a row of aluminum-framed airport chairs. The crash echoed sharply. Gasps rang out. Phones came up. Some passengers screamed. Bruno held steady, jaws clenched on the fabric, low growl vibrating through his body. Joel tried to shake free, kicking wildly, but Bruno adjusted, clamping harder, never piercing flesh. Mark arrived seconds later, panting. Bruno released. The dog obeyed instantly, backing off but remaining in a crouched position, ready to lunge again. Mark pulled his cuffs, flipping Joel over and pinning his wrists behind his back. "You're done," he said. "You're not going anywhere." Two local police officers appeared at the far end of the hallway, weapons holstered but alert. "You good, Delaney?" "Got him," Mark replied, dragging Joel up to a seated position against the wall. The man was breathing hard, eyes wide, panic now overtaking arrogance. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered. "You have no idea what this is about." "Enlighten me," Mark said. Joel just shook his head, jaw twitching. The officers stepped in, helping secure the scene, cordoning off the area as more agents arrived. Mark keyed his shoulder mic. "Holding B, status?" "Charlotte is in custody," came the reply. "Children are separated and safe. Ellie is speaking with a female officer now. Ben hasn't spoken yet." Mark nodded, exhaling slowly. Bruder circled once, then sat beside him, tongue out, panting but still alert. Mark glanced down at the torn cuff of Joel's jeans. The man had tried to run. That wasn't the move of a frustrated parent. That was a man with something to hide. And now, with both adults detained and the children protected, the real questions could finally begin. Inside the sterile hum of the operations center tucked behind Gate D, Mark stood over a terminal, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked on the screen as the system loaded biometric data into the federal identity grid. An agent from Homeland Security, Morales, stood beside him, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard as she isolated and magnified the QR codes embedded in the children's passports. The quiet in the room was absolute, thick with the weight of consequence. The earlier chaos had passed, but the adrenaline hadn't. The scan finished with a soft chime. Morales leaned in, her expression sharpening. "Here we go," she muttered. She clicked into the metadata, then into the issuance source for the two passports labeled as Ellie Miles and Benjamin Miles. "Both passports scanned clean at surface level," she said. "No red flags on laminate consistency, embedded chip, or photo authenticity." "Whoever did this knew what they were doing?" Mark asked, watching her jaw tighten. "But the QR codes are reprints," she replied. "Same base template. Both passports are clones off a single document that was reported missing 4 months ago in Dallas, Texas." Mark's stomach sank. "You're telling me these IDs were made off a stolen original?" "Yes," Morales said, zooming in on the internal structure. "Photo swapped, names changed, MRZ line rebuilt. But the issuer code and digital signature weren't regenerated. That's the tell." "How many people would catch that?" Mark asked. "Not many," she replied. "You'd need this level of access and cross-referencing. At surface scan, they look better than legit." "Jesus," Mark whispered, "and TSA cleared them twice." "Because TSA doesn't go this deep," Morales said, shooting him a look. "But your dog did." Mark clenched his fist slightly, pushing his breath out through his nose. Brunatier sat at his side, still alert though calmer now. Across the room, another agent entered, carrying 2 small plastic bags, each with a child-sized fingerprint card inside. "The kids were compliant," he said, placing the bags on the desk. No hesitation. Ellie even helped guide Ben through the scan. "Run them," Morales said. The agent slid the cards into the reader. The system scanned for a few seconds before a blue dialog box appeared. "Match found," the computer said aloud. Morales clicked. Mark leaned closer. The screen displayed a missing persons profile from Denver PD. 2 children, Grace Harper 6 and Noah Harper 5. Photographs filled the screen. Grace had lighter hair in the image, and Noah was slightly chubbier, but the eyes were unmistakable. Below the photos, date of last contact March 14, report filed by maternal grandmother Mrs. Irene Harper. Legal guardian, incident location rest stop off Interstate 70 near Limon, Colorado. Disappeared while en route to pediatric appointment. Last known companion, non-custodial father with restraining order issued in 2023. Status: abducted. Amber Alert expired after 72 hours. "That's them," Mark said quietly. "Grace and Noah." Morales nodded. He changed the names and appearances just enough to confuse a casual eye. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Mark straightened, running a hand down his face. We need to contact Denver PD and bring Irene Harper into the loop. Let her confirm visually. Morales replied. I also notified Child Protective Services. They're en route. What about Joel and Charlotte? Joel's being processed downstairs, Morales said. He's gone silent, refusing counsel. Charlotte's still holding to the story, claims she's the biological mother, refuses to acknowledge the kids by their real names. Even with evidence, even with fingerprints, even with DNA swab authorization, Morales replied. She's either in deep or operating on instructions. Mark asked, like she's a mule? Exactly. Could be part of a network. This kind of forgery, Mark nodded slowly. So they weren't just relocating kids. They were disguising them permanently. New names, new papers, new lives, Morales said. If your dog hadn't reacted, they'd be in the air by now. Gone. Mark looked down at Bruno, who was lying by the table now, ears still attentive, tail motionless. He knew something was off the moment he saw them. What tipped him off? Morales asked. Chemical scent in the bag. Maybe that, Mark replied. But I think it was them. I think he could read what we missed, their body language, that tense. The silence. You said Grace whispered something to you? You? Mark said quietly. Don't let us go with them. Just like that. No fear, just truth. Morales turned to the monitor again. We're flagging this entire route. I'm escalating to the trafficking task force. This isn't isolated. I agree, Mark said. This isn't a one-off parental abduction. This is coordinated. An alert pinged on the screen. New email, incoming video message from Denver PD. Moraes opened it. The feed stabilized, showing a thin, older woman with white hair tied into a low bun. She sat at a desk in what looked like a precinct conference room, flanked by two detectives. That's Irene Harper, Moraes confirmed. Put up the live photo of the kids. She dragged two stills from the security feed, one of Grace and Noah sitting in the waiting room clutching stuffed animals. They looked small, fragile, eyes uncertain. Morales turned the camera toward the screen. Mrs. Harper, can you confirm the identity of the two children shown? The woman's breath caught audibly through the speakers. Her hand went to her mouth, then she nodded rapidly. Voice breaking. That's them, that's my babies. Mark swallowed hard. We'll bring them home. Irene's voice cracked again. Thank you, thank God. Please tell them they're safe now. We will, Mark said. He ended the call gently. Then he turned to the agent by the door. Get CPS in here now, priority access. Move them to a secure room, no contact with either suspect. Yes, sir. The agent disappeared down the hall. Mark exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Grace and Noah, not Ellie and Ben. Names mattered. Identities mattered. For a few days, those kids had become ghosts. And now, through a dog's refusal to look away, they were real again. He crouched beside Bruno, scratching behind the ears. You saw them, he said. Bruno looked back, calm and sure. Mark rose, staring again at the faces on the screen. Children returned to life because of a moment of instinct. Mark stood alone by the observation window outside the Protective Services suite, his eyes unfocused as he stared through the glass at Grace and Noah sitting quietly on a padded bench, flanked by two agents. A blanket was draped around Grace's shoulders, and Noah had a juice box in one hand, his other still gripping the small stuffed bear that someone had handed him earlier. They looked okay, at least for now, safe. But it wasn't over, and Mark knew that kind of look on a kid's face didn't go away overnight. He reached down absently, fingers brushing behind Bruno's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, a slow blink betraying the hours of alertness still simmering just under the surface. Mark's fingers paused. He could feel the old memory surface like muscle memory, uninvited and sharp. 3 years ago, different terminal, different city, Los Angeles International. It was the end of a long shift. He remembered the woman's name, Carla Devine, alone, middle-aged, dressed for business. She had triggered nothing, no alerts, no suspicious movements. But Bruno had reacted. It was subtle at first. A hesitation, a soft low whine, then a repeated glance back over his shoulder as they moved past her at gate 52. Mark had stopped her, asked her to step aside, searched her carry-on, called in an extra check. But there had been nothing. No drugs, no chemicals, no weapons. No story out of place. Because of him, she had filed a complaint within the hour, accused him of harassment, discrimination, overreach, and worse, he had gone to the press. The department responded swiftly under pressure. They opened an internal review. The review panel didn't care much about instinct. They wanted protocols, evidence, results. And Mark had none. What he did have was a canine officer labeled too reactive under high traffic conditions, and a permanent note in his file. Delaney exhibited judgmental bias unsupported by field data. Canine Bruno recommended for reassignment. The blow wasn't just professional, it was personal. They had tried to separate them. Tried to reassign Bruno to a detection unroll, screening baggage rather than people. Lower exposure, lower risk, lower trust. Mark could have stayed in the field with a new dog, that was standard. Let the agency match him with another canine from the roster. He had said no. Flat, refused. Filed a request to transfer down with Bruno. Demoted himself in practice, though not in title. Some had called it foolish loyalty. Others saw it as a cop clinging to his failure. But Mark had never cared much for no. He cared that Bruno had seen something that day that Mark couldn't explain. That maybe the danger hadn't been in Carla's suitcase, but in Carla herself. Something you couldn't scan or swab or file into a checkbox. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was instinct, maybe that was enough. Now, 3 years later, in a different ceiling of fluorescent lights, the system was finally catching up to what Bruno had already understood, hours earlier. The dog had watched Grace and Noah walk through a crowd, pretending to be someone else's children, and hadn't hesitated to call it out. And Mark had hesitated at first. He had almost shut it down, almost walked away from the noise, the scene, the hassle of getting approvals and justifications. But he hadn't. Not this time. Still thinking about it? Morales asked, appearing beside him with a fresh printout in hand. Mark blinked once and nodded. Always. She handed over the report. PPS is arranging emergency placement. Irene Harper's already boarding a flight to Seattle. She'll be here tonight. Mark skimmed the page, mostly to give his hands something to do. We get anything more from Charlotte? Still stonewalling. Refuses to give real names, insists the kids are hers. But she stopped saying their names completely. Because she knows she doesn't own them anymore, Mark muttered. Morales nodded slowly. Or, because she never did. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. What about Joel, Wayater? Still no statement, but the documents he had on him, fake IDs, multiple aliases, tie him to a crossbed transport ring we've been watching for months. Think of it as great as an organized grab. Not even close, Morales said. This was extraction disguised as travel. Fake family setup. Pass through TSA. Board. Vanish. Mark looked again at the kids through the glass. And what if we hadn't stopped them? Morales said nothing. Bruno shifted slightly beside him, stretching his front paws forward, and then curling back into a low seat, eyes half-lidded but awake. He benched him after the LA incident, Mark said quietly, still watching Bruno. Said he was overreactive, unreliable. And you followed him to baggage screening, Morales said, not quite a question. It wasn't a step back, Mark said. It was the only step that made sense. Morales studied him for a moment, then offered a rare smile. Guess he proved them wrong. Mark's eyes remained fixed on the children. He didn't need to prove anything. I just needed them to let him do what he does. He's lucky to have you, she said. No, Mark replied. I'm lucky he didn't give up on me. A beat passed between them, not quite silence but not conversation either. The kind of quiet you only earn after something important almost goes very, very wrong. A knock tapped lightly against the glass. Grace looked up. Her eyes found Mark's. There was a long pause, and then, slowly, she smiled. Small, fragile, real. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I'll go check the intake forms, Morales said, backing away. Mark gave a soft whistle. Bruno stood, stretched again, then padded beside him. The dog didn't need a command. He never had. They walked down the hallway together, one step, one tail flicked, one silent instinct at a time, heading toward whatever came next. Inside the forensics lab adjacent to the Joint Task Force office at the airport's lower level, Mark stood beside a tech analyst named Raina Cheng, watching as she projected the contents of the recovered phone onto the wide display panel mounted on the wall. The device had been pulled from Charlotte's tote during evidence intake, hidden inside a false zippered pocket along the inner lining, encased in bubble wrap and powered off with the SIM removed. At first glance, it had looked like a decoy, maybe planted just in case. But Raina knew better. We cloned the drive and rehydrated the cache files, she said, eyes flicking between two monitors. Whoever used this phone was careful, VPN routes, anonymized apps, encrypted backups. But not careful enough. With a few quick keystrokes, she opened a recovered PDF file. The screen filled with a spreadsheet grid, rows of airport codes, departure times, arrival cities. Mark leaned in, reading column by column. SEA greater than BOS, DN greater than ordered, IH greater than YVR, SFO greater than ATL. Each row had 2 or 3 letters in the passenger column, seemingly random until you realized they were coded initials. These are kids, he said quietly. These are kids in transit. Raina nodded grimly. Looks like at least 10 active transport routes, all originating from U.S. airports, all ending in either border cities or international handoff points. She scrolled to the bottom. Some of these are scheduled for today, others in the next 72 hours. Mark felt a cold line trace down his spine. He pointed at one row. This one? LAX to MIA. Who's REC? We don't have real names, Raina said. But the pattern suggests all initials correspond to known child abduction cases logged within the past 2 months. Some match partial entries in the NCS database. These aren't random, Mark said. This isn't a one-off op. This is a full system. Look here, Raina said, highlighting another cell. It showed a column titled Gate Clearance Status, with notes beside each entry. D3 flag delay. C5 cleared. F2 cleared. What does that mean? Mark asked. Internal access, she said. We're logging gate information. Which security point was friendliest, which ones they had someone inside. Mark blinked. You think they had someone inside TSA? I know they did, Raina said, tapping her keyboard again. She pulled up a surveillance clip from 2 days earlier. Gate C5. The angle showed a TSA officer in a blue uniform seated at a podium, waving a passenger through without scanning the ID. Raina froze the frame. That's Joel, the same guy who ran on you. Joel walked through with no bag search, no ID scan, no verbal exchange, just a nod, a motion, and he was passed. Rewind 3 seconds, Mark said. She did. Joel extended his hand toward the podium casually, palm closed. A slight flick, a handshake-like movement. Then the TSA agent placed something under his terminal and looked away. I paid him, Mark said. Cash, clean, fast. We ran facial recognition, Raina added. TSA officer is Grant Wallace. Employed 12 years. Clean record. 2 kids of his own. But his bank account shows recent deposits inconsistent with salary. How recent? Within the last 10 days. 2 deposits totaling $12,000. Same week as Charlotte and Joel's movement across 3 airports. Mark crossed his arms, the dread growing heavier. So Joel wasn't just moving kids, he was mapping vulnerabilities. Gate by gate, airport by airport. And logging them in this device, Raina said, so others could use the same path. Which means more kids, Mark muttered, and more flights we don't know about. Raina nodded. The Homeland Field Office already started red-lagging the 6th derbies. We've pushed alerts to every checkpoint supervisor nationwide. Mark glanced again at the file, now open to a page with a simple header. Tiers. It listed groups. Tier 1 priority, under 6, Tier 2 transfer ready. Tier 3 requires prep. Each line had coded child IDs and matched flight routes. They were sorting them, he said, voice lower now. Like inventory. Raina's jaw tightened, yes. And none of this was caught by TSA? Because they were, she said, short layovers, no checked bags, only digital boarding passes. Nothing that triggers a flag, except a dog, Mark murmured. Raina looked at him. Except a dog. Mark turned from the screen, pacing toward the hallway window that overlooked the tarmac. He stared as a plane rolled slowly into position, its nose aligned with the jet bridge. Passengers had no idea. Families boarding, reading books, opening snacks, plugging into headphones, thinking they were in a world of systems and safeguards, unaware that the systems had been bent from the inside. Where's Wallace now? He asked. Being interviewed in terminal security. He didn't deny it, Raina said. Admitted to taking money, claimed he didn't know what it was really for. Bullshit, Mark snapped. You let a man through with no scan. You knew something was wrong. He says he thought it was just a celebrity handler. Some VIP priority thing. But we're pulling his visitor logs and gate clearance requests for the past 6 months. And Joel, still not talking, but I bet if we put this screen in front of him, he'll say something. Mark looked at the data again. Every line a story. Every code a child. Every airport a portal. He thought of Grace's small voice, of the way she clutched that pillow, of Bruno's bark echoing down the terminal like it had been waiting years to be heard again. He exhaled slowly, watching the rain begin to blur against the glass, and knew the storm wasn't passing, it was only just beginning. Within 24 hours of the decrypted flight map, the FBI moved fast. A task force was mobilized under Operation Skylock, pulling resources from child exploitation units, human trafficking divisions, and air transit security. The urgency was real. The spreadsheet Raina recovered didn't just hint at routes, it confirmed a clock. At least 10 children were in active transit windows, with 6 flights marked for the next 48 hours, and multiple gate identifiers suggesting coordinated internal aid at 3 different airports: Los Angeles International, Miami International, and Dallas Love Field. Mark had barely left the terminal that night. He slept 2 hours in a TSA break room with Bruno curled up beside him, then sat in on the 600 briefing with Agent Ramirez from FBI's Child Trafficking Division. Ramirez didn't waste time with niceties. She had a voice like gravel and a presence that erased excuses. We've already intercepted 2 flights since midnight, she said, clicking through the digital board. 1 at LAX, 1 at Miami. Both matched codes from the data Mark's team recovered. In both cases, minors were traveling with forged documents and non-familiar adults. Both adults are now in custody. The kids are safe. The room stayed quiet as she continued. Third operation is underway now in Dallas. That one's bigger, higher value target. We have a potential hub coordinator on site. Mark sat forward, fully awake. A name, Graham Beckett, she said, and the screen shifted. A photo appeared, mid-50s, silver hair, collared shirt, blazer, face neutral, friendly. Forgettable, owner of a non-profit called Children United, operating out of Houston but with satellite offices in 4 states. Publicly, he funds at-risk youth and coordinates refugee relocation efforts. Privately, we believe he's laundering identities and distributing forged guardianship docs to facilitate child movement across state and international lines. The phone connected to him, Mark asked. Indirectly, Ramirez said. The metadata links a cloud backup from Charlotte's burner phone to a secondary account, registered under one of Beckett's foundations. Cross-referencing showed recurring flight payments from a joint fund Beckett controls. He's not just helping, he's coordinating. Where is he now? Dallas Love Field, she said. Flight 629 from San Diego arrives in 40 minutes. We believe a handoff is scheduled at Gate B4. Target, female minor traveling with an older female posing as her aunt. Name on the ticket is coded in the same Tier 1 format. Mark glanced at the screen. So he's going to receive the child directly? We believe so, she said. We've posed as gate staff, plainclothes officers, and janitorial staff. As soon as the handoff occurs, we move. The tension in the room thickened. Mark's hand found Bruno's collar, grounding himself through familiar fur. Ramirez looked at him. You did good work, Delaney. You and your dog cracked this open. We just saw what others missed, he replied. You acted on it, she said. Most don't. The clock on the wall read 8:27 a.m. At 9:01, they received the call. Target in custody, came the voice from the Dallas field agent. Graham Beckett detained without incident. Minor secured, traveling companion resisting but unarmed. She's going in too. A wave of quiet relief passed through the room like a slow tide. Good, Ramirez said, standing. That's 4 kids in 24 hours. We don't stop now. She turned toward the larger operations board. We widen. Cross-check Beckett's donor list. Look for anyone with travel authority or diplomatic cover. I want all outbound flights with minor accompaniments scanned against this format. What about the nonprofits? Someone asked. We're going through their 990 forms now, she replied. Front groups are easier to build than destroy. But if we follow the wire transfers, we'll find every branch of this thing. Mark stood too, unable to sit any longer. His bones ached with the weight of momentum, but his mind was running clear. Can we link Beckett to the same gate pattern Charlotte and Joel used? Yes, Ramirez confirmed. You already found archived emails between Beckett's office and the same TSA agent, Grant Wallace. Phrased like donor coordination, but the times matched the gate logs for Joel's clearances. It's all connected. Mark looked down at Bruno, who stood now too, tail slightly wagging, as if he could feel the shift in the air. You had this guy in our system the whole time, Mark muttered. Public appearances, charity awards, even guest lectures at local schools. He was hiding in plain sight. That's how they win, Ramirez said. They make it palatable, trustworthy. They weaponize good intentions. And silence, Mark added. They rely on no one asking the wrong questions. But we are now, she said. And we're not. The room buzzed with renewed focus. Agents grabbed files, traced call logs, coordinated across field offices. Mark stepped aside, away from the screens, staring for a moment at the map of the U.S. marked with red flags at every airport linked to the operation. Dallas, Miami, LA, Seattle, Denver, Atlanta. Every point had a story. Every dot a near miss. His phone buzzed. Text from Rayner. Kid from ORD flight recovered. Female, 7. In protective custody. Adult male in custody. Match confirmed from PDF list. He read it twice, then exhaled. Bruno nudged his leg gently. Yeah, Mark said under his breath. We're just getting started. The room had no ceremony to it, just fluorescent lights, muted gray walls, and the soft murmur of conversation as case agents filed in and out with documents and coffees. But for Grace and Noah, it was the most important room in the world. Irene Harper sat at the far end of the family room inside the Seattle Child Services Center, her hands trembling as she opened her arms, and both children, hesitant at first, walked slowly into them. Mark stood quietly in the corner with Bruno, giving the moment the space it deserved. Grace leaned in first, her arms tightening around her grandmother's neck. Noah hung back half a step longer, eyes darting toward the window, until Irene reached for him with her other hand, calling softly, "Come here, baby." He went. They stayed like that for a long time. The agents didn't interrupt. No one took photos. Mark had seen reunions before, sometimes messy, sometimes confusing, but this one had a kind of stillness that came only from relief after fear. When Irene finally turned to thank everyone in the room, her face streaked with tears, she said the names like she hadn't spoken them in days. Grace, Noah. Not Ellie and Ben. Not aliases. Just who they had always been. Mark cleared his throat lightly and crouched beside Bruno, who had been sitting in the same quiet posture the whole time. Noah noticed him then, stepping slowly toward the dog with cautious feet, his fingers curling into the sleeve of his jacket. Bruno didn't move, just waited, alert but calm. When Noah reached him, he dropped to his knees and wrapped both arms around Bruno's neck, holding tight, the kind of grip a child gives when words haven't caught up to everything they've been through. Mark heard the boy whisper something, so soft he almost missed it. "I thought no one saw us." Bruno leaned into the hug gently, letting the boy rest there a moment longer. Mark swallowed hard, looked away, and gave them their silence. 3 days later, the terminal looked just like it always did. Busy, polished, indifferent. But for Mark, it would never feel quite the same again. The concourse floor where Bruno had barked, the gate where Grace had whispered for help, the hallway where Joel had run, every detail etched like shadow behind glass. But something else had shifted too. Homeland Security had issued a formal commendation to Bruno, naming him Canine Exceptional Action of the Year, the only canine in 5 years to receive that classification without a military or bomb defusal operation. His profile would be used in training modules nationwide. His bark, the very one once flagged as too sensitive for field use, was now part of the revised alert threshold for child endangerment scenarios. Mark had stood beside him when the announcement came, not in a press conference, not on a podium, but quietly, in an internal email circulated through the agency, with a subject line that simply read, "Recognition, Bruno, Seattle-Tacoma Canine Unit." Mark had been asked a day later if he would consider stepping into a new role, liaison officer and tactical advisor for a special canine human behavioral detection task force. He said yes, but only if he could still work the field. When the director asked why, Mark's answer was simple: because instincts don't happen in the office. They approved the request. Bruno stayed as his partner. They remained assigned to Seattle-Tacoma, rotating shifts between terminal patrol and special assignment review. But this time with authority to override low-tier clearances when a threat was identified. No more second-guessing. No more letting instinct die at the edge of protocol. One morning, a week after the operation's closure, Mark and Bruno stood once again near Gate C-21. Passengers moved past them without pause, dragging luggage, sipping coffee, scrolling phone. Bruno sat calmly at his side, his gaze sweeping the crowd, not anxious, not tense, just aware. Mark watched a little girl run up to hug her dad after coming through security. Watched a teenager offer to carry a stranger's suitcase up the escalator. Watched everything and felt it differently. Because behind the normal, behind the everyday, he now knew what could hide and what could be saved. Grace and Noah had sent a drawing in the mail. A crude sketch in crayon, folded into 4 with, "To Bruno and the nice man," written across the top. It showed 2 stick-figure kids holding hands beside a dog with a badge and a very long tail. Mark had tacked it onto the bulletin board behind his desk, right above a worn snapshot of Bruno as a young pup from their first training day together. The 2 images felt like bookends, one marking the beginning, the other reminding him why none of it had been wasted. He glanced down at Bruno now, who looked back up with ears perked. "We doing okay?" Mark asked quietly. Bruno's tail gave one lazy wag. Mark smiled. "Yeah, me too." The overhead speaker announced a delay on Flight 324. People groaned and shifted. Bruno didn't react. His eyes remained fixed ahead, watching, waiting, working. Mark looked out at the terminal floor, the ordinary blur of lives in motion, and knew that nothing about what they'd done would make the world quieter or cleaner. But maybe if they stayed sharp, stayed human, stayed true to the quiet language between man and dog, they could stop someone else from being erased. One bark, one breath, one child at a time. If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Real moments where instinct, courage, and quiet heroes change everything. What part of this story stuck with you the most? Was it Bruno's first bark, or when Grace whispered those quiet words? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment. Your thoughts matter, and we'd love to hear how far this story is reaching.